This video is about chords that I say have an identity problem. These are the chords that have more than one name. Often traditional teachers and jazz teachers differ on which name to use. In traditional theory, we are taught to name chords according to their snowman form. If we transfer that idea to jazz chord notation, we use a slash to show an inversion, and for the most part this works very well. Major and minor chords fall into this system, and so does a dominant 7 chord. When we invert a dominant 7 chord, we always keep the same name, and we add a slash. For instance, the first inversion of a G7 chord is simply written as G7 over B. So far, we have no conflict between two different systems. However, there are important exceptions to this rule, and they happen in first inversions of two diatonic 7 chords. When we move a minor 7 chord to first inversion, we rename the chord. A D minor 7 chord inverted becomes an F6 chord. We could call it a D minor 7 over F, but it takes longer to figure it out this way and it is less direct. It even takes longer to say it. We don't want to take the slow boat to China. When we move a B half diminished chord to a first inversion, we rename it to a D minor 6. We could call it D half diminished chord over D, but this way also takes longer to figure it out, is less direct, and is harder even to say. So that's the basic story right there, and this is the point in the video where you can stop if you think you've learned enough. But there is more to the story, and I'm going to cover that in the rabbit hole. When we invert a sus4 chord, we end up with a sus2 chord with a different root. First of all, remember that a sus and a sus4 mean the same thing. For example, C sus and C sus4 means exactly the same thing, so you can use either term with complete confidence. A C sus chord flows either to a C major chord or an F major chord. Now, it can go to other places, but let's stick with this basic idea first. As I said, when we invert a C sus chord, we end up with an F sus2 chord. So this F sus2 chord also moves to a C major chord or an F major chord. It's the same idea. Now things are going to get much more complicated. If we start with the C sus7 chord and invert it, suddenly we have an F double sus chord. Once again, it's really the same chord, but it gets renamed to avoid a slash. In fact, the main idea is to always avoid a slash whenever possible. When we use a slash where it is unnecessary, I call it the slow boat to China, because it makes the brain go through unnecessary extra steps. Finally, something very strange happens when we have a dominant 7th chord with a flat 5. When we invert this chord 2 times, it is renamed to another dominant 7th with a flat 5. We do this simply to avoid the slash. So if we start with a B7 flat 5 and move to the second inversion of this same chord, we rename it to F7 flat 5. At this point we can keep the same spelling, or we can renotate it, but either way the result is the same. What you want to remember is that jazz chords are not dependent upon spelling. In some cases this particular chord looks much better written with a sharp 4, but it is still called a 7 flat 5 chord. For instance, if I write an E flat 7 flat 5 chord, I will use an A rather than a B double flat because it is easier to read. In that chord, A is technically sharp 4, but we will still call it a flat 5 in the chord because we don't want to change how we name the chord. And there you have the full story of why some chords have an identity problem. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, leave comments about anything you'd like, comments about anything you'd like to see in the future, and remember that I consider all suggestions.